Mr. Michael Colopy from Aristotle International, who manages communications for Aristotle, and I know it was the first non-lawyer the Wall Street Journal noted to be a general partner in a U.S. law firm. I don't know if you were the last, but apparently you're the first. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to add to your comment about John Stuart Mill. Your predecessor and my family friend, Bob Drinan, said years ago, referring to how some of these debates develop, that policy is often formed by the voices that are heard rather than the realities that exist. He said if René Descartes were alive today, he wouldn't say cogito ergo sum, he would say dico ergo sum. I speak, therefore I am. And so, reluctantly drawn by that dictum, I'm here today.
I thank you. My predecessor, Father Drinan, was much more adept at Latin than I should acknowledge.
Moving right along. There are so many things that, in his day and now, have to be elucidated by these hearings, and that is why Aristotle, the company that is the leading provider of verification technology for most elected officials in the United States, and is also now the industry leader in online age and ID verification, insisted that I respond to your request and be here today. So I'm going to make a few generic remarks, and I want to address head-on some things that are said here today and that are put about by PR and interested parties in confusing an issue that must be seen clearly for policy to be framed in a coherent and effective manner. Number one, let's look at what society wants to do, which presumably is to do the right thing, protect our most vulnerable members, mitigate risk of fraud and abuse and so on. And then the second question is, what is the market? What is the free enterprise system doing to address these issues? Those are two fundamental questions. First off, we have to point out to the fact that while time flies, technology rockets forward, that technologies that were discussed in just the last Congress are now almost obsolete. I know, for example, that there was a report aired in November 2005, which I believe we have, right? Let's have a look at it. This is from 60 Minutes, November 2005.
To test that, we gave Alex Hartman, the 16-year-old son of this story's producer, his dad's MasterCard.
Why can't a 16-year-old just pretend he's his father? You know, he can go online, he's got his father's credit card, and he reads you off all the numbers.
That 16-year-old's got to give me 4 to 5 pieces of information about him, relative to his bank account, his personal details, where he lives, and other things. So I could be 99% comfortable that this 16-year-old doesn't even get through my front door.
This is his front door. Payne's company owns Paradise Poker, and it appears that he's right. Something made the computer suspicious about Alex. Warnings kept popping up, you must be 18 or older. And then he was rejected. But then Alex did what most kids would. He tried another site and another. On the third try, without any questions about his age, he was approved. In 5 minutes, Alex was playing roulette.
Place your bets, please.
In 10 minutes,
all right, all black.
He was $100 in the hole.
No.
Here's what I'm thinking, that the pool of potential underage gamblers is so much more enormous for you, the online company, than it is for the casino.
Without doubt, which is why we have to be 20 times better. But it's also why we also have to be regulated. Unless you force companies to have these procedures, you're letting them all in.
Payne argues that if the U.S. legalized iGaming, all of the problems associated with gambling could be better controlled.
Let's talk about then addicted gamblers, obsessive gamblers.
Yeah.
This is a huge problem for online gambling. They can just be at work, they can be home, it can be any hour of the day.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a huge problem for gambling, full stop.
But even worse,
including internet.
okay, but even worse for your form of it.
No,
well, why not?
Better for my form of it. Imagine you're an addicted gambler. You try and reload your account too quickly because you're playing too quickly. Stop.
So, okay.
I've got a closed loop of data. I can actually track what you do.
Mr. Chairman, many of the points you made resonate with this report. But as I said, that was in November of 2005. 60 Minutes re-aired it in November of 2006 because members here and elsewhere were saying they weren't aware that there were any technologies available that could age verify and identity verify. The court record that was referred to earlier is already being noted as an example of judicial opinion that is way behind the times. Right now, the company that I represent here today, Aristotle, and others, are doing tens of millions of high-risk verifications all the time. All the major motion picture studios that show R-rated trailers use the verification system to keep kids out. Tobacco sales. In the state of Virginia, it's on the books that you have to have online age verification. We have not had a single sale get through the system. California has similar rules. So
That's
do our
internet sales.
Online internet sales and marketing. So I'd like to point out that, like 120 years ago, there's a great cartoon in Punch where two wealthy socialites are rolling along in a carriage. And on all sides of them are vehicles driving by, and one fancy lady says to the other, "They're show-offs. They say bold things about what they can do." That cartoon applies to much of what I hear being said now about online age and ID verification. I'm not making a bid for gaming in any form. I'm simply saying that we have to have an honest and truthful representation of what is possible. And that brings me to the second part of it. What's the market doing? Why does American Express use it? Why do 350 major financial institutions use it all the time? They're not doing it for their health. They're doing it to mitigate risk. They're doing it to make sure they're not sued for dealing with underage kids. On the question of credit cards, by the way, a very important point should be made. The U.S. Operations of Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and others have a prohibition on the use of credit cards for verification for a very specific reason, that credit cards were, in fact, sold and distributed to many people who are therefore underage. But there are also other reasons why they do not believe that a credit card by itself is a sufficient proxy for age. That is a very important point. It's not a sufficient proxy for age. It is a system with lots of weaknesses if just the credit card is used. However, when you use a mix of data, as Nigel Payne mentioned here, and as others have said, and you use state-of-the-art technology, including geolocation, which despite what Mr. Schmidt said here today, which was an technologically incorrect representation of the technology, you can identify up to a very high degree the location of an individual where they are accessing from where they are accessing your site. I'd like to make another point. Many of these arguments are put forward by interested parties who don't want to be inconvenienced by child protection. That should not be taken as a technological argument. Ours is the leading technology in this field, but there are many others. None of us have been surveyed by the opponents of this. The most definitive paper by Adam Tierer includes no data, and he spurned a request to look at the state-of-the-art of online age and ID verification. I put that before you when you're listening to these dramatic tales about how unreliable these systems are.
I've enjoyed this hearing, and because it's very rare, we often have people coming in with different opinions. But unless I'm wrong, we now have people who have different facts and have a severe disagreement. So, Mr. Colopy, I understood you, and I think also Mr. Kitchen, to talk about effective rates of the, let's take the IP locator technology of 99% or some such thing, and Mr. Schmidt's testimony is a 20% failure rate. So, Mr. Colopy, I'll put it as directly as I can, being from the Midwest. I mean, you think that Mr. Schmidt's full of baloney with his observations?
I will only insist on what the evidence shows. What Mr. Schmidt referred to is no evidence. What we do daily is evidence. You know, arguments and PR have no beta test. Data and companies that use them do. They perform or they're not used. They're effective or they're not paid for. No company takes on age verification, the extra burden of a check, unless it has a direct material impact on benefits to that company, meaning to their consumers. So what I'm talking about are facts. And as I mentioned earlier, in the research that's been bandied about this topic, efforts to actually look at real-time online age and identity verification were not accepted. No one's ever asked us for any information on what we do that opposes this. That is significant because public relations is often damaged by data. What we're talking about is hard data, what's happening today, what the marketplace is doing, whether you're liberal, moderate, or conservative. In our society, we have this combination of humane principles and the market economy. In both cases, the movement of the market under those humane principles is toward real-time, effective, robust, reliable age verification and identity verification.
I got you. But let me ask you, and then I'll go to you, Mr. Schmidt. I have trouble turning my computer on, so I don't know a lot of the different things, but there is something called spooling or spoofing. And when Mr. Schmidt was talking about using this phone card, in my small world, when we said spoof when I was growing up, it mean you're playing a joke on your parents, but apparently now it's a computer term. Are you indicating that Mr. Schmidt's experience with whatever he used, and I'll ask him about that again, where he got 3 different answers on where he was and none of them were Boston and Washington, is nothing more than a story that he's telling?
Again, I can't comment on data I haven't seen or a fact base that's put before me. I've never seen any of that information. In prior events like this, there's been no hard data presented. The hard data that I see all the time is what the Aristotle operation shows. Now, the other important point here is that in doing work, for example, for the New York State Lottery, no offense, Mr. Chairman, but we actually assist them in complying with agreements they have with other states. I don't mean an offense to what you said, but to bring up that lottery question again. This is a contentious issue, and as the Reverend said, people have different views about it. But as an operational matter, which is the only thing I'm talking about, as an operational matter, it's fundamentally important that the state of New York know that the purchaser of that ticket is within the state of New York. It's also fundamentally important for banking operations, both internationally and nationally, to know where somebody is when they're attempting to execute a transaction. What was said earlier about how unreliable it is does not square with the facts of 2007, but it probably is relevant to the facts of 2001. I'm suggesting that technology in the service of social good in the private sector is here, it's available, it's effective, and we should be using it.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I just, by way of commercial, I use your software and never been fined by the FEC, so I appreciate it very much. Mr.
If the gentleman would yield, for a representative from Ohio, that's a significant statement.
Oh. Yeah. Well, Mr. Schmidt.
Tailpipe in the works. We're talking about a system that, to be effective as age and identity verification, has many component parts. These systems, by the way, have several levels of tolerance, which are set according to the risk confronted. What they call is process matched to risk. And therefore, it is a complex mix, algorithm, if you will, of capabilities that are adjusted in the cases in which they're used. It's not appropriate to make any general statement about all these cases and give a statistical number without looking at the context and the set of data you're talking about. Again, the data tells the story. The data tells the story in the marketplace every day in the tens of millions where a lot is at risk. That is what we do.